You know what I like more than material gain? Knowledge. So that's why in this video I'm going to be sharing all the knowledge that I have regarding anime hair. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time with hair. And if you think about it, it's really no wonder. Hair is a complex 3D shape, but it's also a hierarchy of 3D shapes. So don't feel bad if your hair sucks. My hair sucks too. That being said, if you're just starting out and you don't even know where to start, I think I'm going to have some useful tips for you, so stick around. So anyway, we might as well get started here. So the first thing I want to show you is a brief overview of the different types of hair that you can actually make, because there's quite a few, believe it or not. So I'll go over these one by one, briefly discussing the strengths and the weaknesses, when you should use them, things like that. So to my knowledge, there's at least 5 methods of making hair in Blender at the time of this recording. And the first one of these is geometry nodes. So you might be a little bit intimidated by geometry nodes, especially if you're a beginner. Certainly it can get very complicated very quickly, but geometry nodes gives you an unprecedented level of control. So if you were to make hair with geometry nodes, you would have full control of every strand, every vertex, the type of noise that you use, everything. The downside is that you basically need to be an expert to use this workflow because you need to know geometry nodes, but you also need to know a lot about hair, like how it behaves, how you want it to lay on the body. Basically, what I'm saying is if you don't know what you're doing, then this level of control that you have in geometry nodes is actually a bad thing. So anyway, I don't know what I'm doing, so frankly, this method is out for me, but I did want to mention it just in case you're crazy enough to try it. So the next method is to simulate hair with a hair system. This is by far the heaviest type of hair, and you pretty much have to go this way if you're making realistic hair. It can be very fiddly to get the shape that you want with this approach, and it's really going to hit your hair 100 times hard, but the results are also going to be very good if you manage to master the method. At least assuming you want a realistic style. Personally, I am experimenting a little bit with this method. I want to use it more, but it has a very steep learning curve, and I don't feel like I'm there yet. One tip that I have for you if you decide to go this route is make sure you use controller curves. So these are curves that actually affect the direction of your hair strands, and this makes it much easier to pose your hair strands to the shape that you want. But anyway, we will not be using this method, and frankly, this is not the best method necessarily if you're going for a stylized look like us. So next I'm going to show you the easiest method that you should probably be using 90% of the time, and that is using curves to make your hair. So Bezier is fine or Paths is fine, whatever you're more comfortable with. There are a lot of tutorials on this topic already on YouTube, so I'm not going to go over this in too much detail. But basically, in this method, you're making curves and you're giving them geometry based on a profile. So typically a Bezier circle that you've modified to have the profile that you want, and a taper curve to give the strand the thickness that you want at each given point. This method is very quick and it gives you decent results, but it has a fatal flaw, which is that the curves are separate objects, so they don't actually merge. This may not bother you that much, but at least for me, it bothers me a lot because you get the sharp lighting whenever two strands meet. Thankfully, there is a way around this. You can turn the curves into a mesh and actually do the merging, so you get smooth shading between the strands. Unfortunately, this is very labor intensive and it sort of runs counter to the point of modeling with curves, which is that it's easy to tweak and easy to quick and easy to model. Not even that, you might not even get a desirable result after putting in the work. And don't even get me started on the UVs. The base hair method will give you decent UVs, but once you start merging the strands, all bets are off the window. If you were really devoted, you could actually make like a block out with curves and then go back and retopologize it so that you actually get the smooth shading. This is extremely labor intensive, but it might give you the best results, honestly. So anyway, TLDR, if you want quick results that look decent, use curves. So the next method is the sort of compromise between realism and stylization, which is also very performant, which is the so-called hair cards method. You'll see this approach in a lot of games, and the basic idea is that you make like a blocky hair shape, and then you texture it with realistic hair textures. So personally, I don't really like this approach very much. I feel like it's a half measure. It's not stylized, but it's not realistic either. It's kind of like this weird middle ground. That's not to say that it looks bad though. You can definitely make some really good looking hair with this method, and I would definitely recommend looking into this. But anyway, the strength for this method is definitely that it's very performant. So your geometry is going to be really low using this method. But the weakness is that you're really building an illusion here. So generally speaking, your hair is not going to have any volume when using this method, and the illusion is only as good as the hair cards that you provide your model with. So yeah, I think one thing I might try and do that I haven't actually done before is use hair cards to like add a little bit of texture to my hair. i.e. I might use them as a normal map. You don't have to use them directly as a texture. But yeah, especially when it comes to hair, there is no one correct way to make hair. Like it really depends. And there's so many types of hair, right? So you should really try to experiment and find the way that works for you. I'm just introducing you to the tools here. Okay, and the last method that we will actually be using in this video is the so-called polyhair method. So in this case, you literally just model the hair as if it were a piece of geometry, right? So this is probably the most crude, the most caveman way of going about things, but it also gives you arguably the most control, and it's really good for stylized hair, which is generally speaking made with the same idea anyway. I.e., if you're a 2D artist, how do you actually draw hair? Basically, you're taking big shapes and you're sort of merging them together and pretending like they're a mass. So that's exactly what we're doing with polyhair as well. So as for the strengths and the weaknesses, I would say one strength and weakness of polyhair is the level of control it gives you. So you have a lot of control over what shape you want to make, but you also have a lot of opportunity to screw it up. It's very labor intensive and it can be very difficult to work with as well. So honestly, I would not recommend this method for beginners. Definitely go with curves if you're a beginner. I'll share more tips as we actually start to model. But before that, I would like to share this video with you by a YouTuber called A Version of Reality, which shows a lot of tips for working with polyhair, and I think it's a hidden gem that not many people know about. But anyway, without further ado, let's get started. So thankfully for me, the hair that we're going to be making in this video is very, very simple. So if we look back at our reference, we have this round shape in the back, and in the front we have this one mass of hair. This is honestly not going to be very representative because I think most people are going to have more complex hair setups than this. But hey, maybe there's something here that'll help you out. Who knows? So just like in the previous video, we're going to do this in steps. And the first step is we're going to make a bunch of hair strands that we can use for our model. These are just some shapes to get us started. We will modify these as we place them on the model. So to start with, just make them flat planes. Don't worry about the volume yet. And I would recommend making 2 small shapes, 2 medium shapes, and 2 big shapes. So that way you have a nice variation of size. This is very important to make an appealing design, to have all the 3 kinds of shapes represented. Make sure you have a comparable amount of geometry in each strand. This will make it easier when we actually go to merge the hairs together. Once you have the basic shapes, I recommend going back and adding a few loop cuts and adding some 3D variation to your shapes. So for right now, I'm talking about the profile of the hair. We can adjust this later, of course, and we will have to go back and adjust this, especially if you want to subdivide the hair. But right now is the easiest time to get this right. So I would say at the very least, just add some variation, right? So you want some detail on your model. You don't just want it to be a flat surface. That'll look really, really boring, even if you texture it. Okay, the next step is slightly more complicated. So now you want to start merging these strands together and making larger compound strands. So this is the key to making good poly hair, and it's also the reason why it's not really a beginner-friendly method. 2 things you want to keep in mind here is you want to keep the edge flow going vertically. This is going to be important for UVs. And the other thing is that you want to be extremely careful not to end up with internal faces. Try to make interesting shapes that look good from multiple angles, that incorporate small, medium, and large details. And try to pop into solid or rendered mode every now and then to see how the shading looks, because you don't want to end up in a situation where the geometry looks good but the smooth shading is broken. If you're having trouble actually designing these compound strands, I'm going to link you another video by Daniel Kreuter. But yeah, I don't think it's that complicated. Um, just remember to also have some volume variation in your strands. So once you're happy with the front view, you should add volume to the whole strand. And yeah, just this is why polymodeling takes a lot of time. Like you have to look at it from every angle. There's a lot of manual modeling that goes into it. But take your time, and I'm sure you're going to come up with something that you like. At this point, it's also a good time to place the seams for your hair strand. If you've done a good job keeping the topology clean, this should be relatively simple. And now you have to repeat the process a couple of times to have a couple of compound strands to work with. In my case, I only need the one because my hair is mostly glued to the face. But once you've done that, it's time for the next step, which is to actually place the hair on the model. And we're going to do this using the curve modifier. So let me show you how that's done. So it's really simple. Just make a curve object, place it where you want the hair to be. Next, select the strand that you want to place on your model. Go into modifiers, add a curve modifier. And for the modifier to work properly, the origin of the curve and the hair strand have to be placed at the start of the hair strand. So pick the correct orientation. Usually it's either Y or Z or minus Y or minus Z. And you're good to go basically. Once you're happy with the placement, you can apply the modifier if you want. We will apply it at the very end to merge the hair strands. However, I usually make a copy of all the hair strands so I can go back if I'm unhappy with something. So yeah, at this point it's just rinse and repeat. At this point, one thing I should probably mention is if you're confused about like where the hair strand should actually meet and merge, let me show you a picture that I drawn. So just for organizational purposes, it's usually simplest to split the hair into front hair, side hair, and back hair. And you define an area basically in the middle of the head or the scalp where all the strands meet. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. I'm showing you two of the most common ways here. But yeah, the way I like to think about it is like there's a seam in the hair and all the strands are approaching the seam as you go up. And yeah, it's just that simple. So right now I'm just going to model in the big shape that it's in the front hair. I decided that it would be simplest if I just went freestyle for this, since it's a very simple shape. Same thing for the other side, not a whole lot to talk about here. And wouldn't you know it, more or less same thing for the back hair as well. So I'm going to skip over a lot of this. I don't think there's much educational content here. It just takes a lot of time and it's just doing the same thing over and over. A lot of micro adjusting, basically problems that are so specific to my model that it doesn't really make sense to talk about them. So for example, one problem that I was having was that I wanted that round shape to show from the front view, but I also didn't want it to be like too insane from other views. And finding that balance, took quite a bit of time, like hopping into sculpt mode, making fine adjustments, looking from different angles, making more adjustments, things like that. Like that doesn't really, you don't need to see that, I don't think. I also decided to add a couple more strands to the hair so that it looks a little bit more populated. But yeah, once you're more or less happy with the shape of the hair, it's time for the fun part, quote unquote, to merge everything together and actually have like continuous shading. So once again, this is just a whole lot of manual labor that I don't really want to show. But one thing that I will say is keep track of your UVs. You don't want to mess up your UVs in this process, and it's very easy to do so. This process just takes a long time and there's really nothing you can do to speed it up. In some cases, like the hair has taken me more time than the actual character, which is kind of insane. But it's just that the hair is such a complex uh, fixture on the character, so it just ends up being that way. But yeah, hopefully by the end of it, you'll have something half decent. It might not look great still at this point since we don't have any materials, but we can always adjust it later still. The most important thing is that you're happy with the basic shape. uh, we can make the fine adjustments later. Once everything is merged, it might also be a good idea to like go over the hair one more time and like make fine adjustments to the three-dimensional feel of the hair. So like add edge loops where you feel like there should be more detail. Um, move verts around, tweak it, you know, because now you have it on the actual model, so you can see how it looks in context. And now I got some bad news for you. That's right, we're not done yet. We need to do this all over again. Why do I say that? Because if you only do one layer of hair, it looks kind of one-dimensional. So you actually need to do multiple layers for it to feel like a proper head of hair. Now, this is the correct way of doing things if you want a good model. I want a passable model. I hate hair so much that I'm gonna skip this part because I don't want to have to think about hair ever again. But yeah, I just thought I should mention that you should do multiple layers if you want a really good result at the end. But that's more or less it for this video. Um, if you made it this far, congratulations. Now you're really out of the woods, I would say, because everything from here on out is pretty much plain sailing, I would say. Like, I mean, some of the things are tricky still, like the hand and the feet, but nothing like this. Like the hair just is an absolute nightmare. So join me next time when we're gonna take a look at the body. We'll see how far we can go in one video, and I'll see you then.